Welcome to Tehachapod, the City of Tehachapi's podcast, where we share conversations with local leaders, business owners, and community members. Don't miss an episode. Be sure to follow and subscribe to learn something new and discover ways to get involved in our community.
Hello and welcome back to Tehachapod. Maya Acosta here, joined in the studio today by Greg Garrett and Corey Costello. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome, yeah. Thank you.
Very excited today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Today is an exciting episode. We are calling this our Salute to Freedom episode, where we're talking all about the amazing sacrifices the men and women of our armed forces have made to protect our country. And we have no more of a fitting guest than General Douglas of Wickert with us today. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're excited to talk all things Edwards Air Force Base. It's such an impressive asset to Kern County, Southern California, really, the world. We could go on and on. But how did you make your way to Edwards Air Force Base?
So it took me a better part of 3 decades, 2.5 decades to finally get to Edwards. I'm that rare test pilot that hadn't had an Edwards assignment until now. I went through the Naval Test Pilot School. But the long legacy of aviation history, of the number of things that have been created and developed at Edwards Air Force Base it's something that I grew up just steeped in and loving doing what we're doing up there right now. And it continues. Right now, we are at I know we'll get into it, historically high ops tempo at Edwards Air Force Base right now, as pretty much the Air Force is modernizing every single weapon system. That means everything is going through test at the same time.
It is hugely impressive. And I know we've seen new contracts like the F-47 being awarded to Boeing, and then in the years to come will make its way to Edwards. What do these impressively new technologies that are changing every day and making their way towards Edwards, what does that mean not only for the Air Force Base, but our region?
Yeah, a great question. Edwards would not be what it is without the support of the local communities. We're roughly 20% military, 80% civilians. So 8,000 people come through the gates on a daily basis. Our military, only a portion of them are able to live on base. So the rest of them have to live out in the local community. So we see just really, really close partnership with the local communities. If you want to know, your question is about the future of the Air Force, the future of the Space Force. If you want to know what the Air Force of 2030 or the Air Force of 2035 is going to look like, it's the Air Force that's flying in our skies, here in our little corner of the Mojave Desert every day. The Air Force that's flying over Edwards Air Force Base today is the future Air Force.
Well, sometimes I look up and, you see the contrail and then it takes a hard 90. And you think, wait, how did that just happen? They're testing something out there that is pretty darn cool.
We're testing a lot of things that are pretty darn cool.
Across the board, right, A to Z. But Maya, you asked the question about the economic impact and different things that are going on. The role of the city of Tehachapi is to support the base and other industries, that's for sure. And we're so happy to do that. But the economic impact, can we talk a little bit about the payroll and the small business opportunities and all the different things? Because you're running a city, quite frankly, not an incorporated city, but a city. You're the city manager of Edwards Air Force Base.
Yeah, great question. So we are, if we were a corporation, we'd be an 8,000 person company with a $1.4 billion of operating of revenue. So $1.4 billion is our total operating authority. About $1 billion of that is payroll. And that comes right back into the local community. So, you could typically, rule of thumb, you can often look at, the second order effects, kind of like a 10 to 1 is the economic ratio multiplier. So the direct impact of that $1.4 billion of operations at Edwards Air Force Base is, probably equivalent, to $10 to $15 billion across the the economic impact for the wider area. So not small by any means.
Right.
And the biggest difference between you and a corporation is you have way cooler toys to play with.
Well, our toys are pretty cool.
There's not many folks out there that get to do the stuff.
Our toys go Mach 2 plus.
And you see, he said Mach 2 plus.
Yeah, that's the future thing that he's talking about. That's the future reference. Absolutely. And maybe explain to folks too how, I guess, the process, but someone comes up concept for a future aircraft or whatever it is, and then there's contracts awarded, and then where does Edwards kind of fit into that sort of? Then this becomes combat ready.
Oh, I love this question. I love this.
Real quick, I saw on your website though, Corey, if you want to test, come test with us. You just fill out your little application and you can go test with you, right? Like Joby Aviation,
Yes.
right? They're the future of electric air taxis. They're on North Base right now. So,
They are.
Corey, if you have an idea, let me know, and then we could start a company and go do that.
Yeah,
and this
I'm
and
built
that.
for
I'm going to get
comfort,
myself
not
in
for
trouble.
speed. Yeah.
That is one of I'm so glad you asked that, because it's one of the really exciting things that's happening right now is the ecosystem. We are seeing a lot of what we would consider non-traditional defense vendors, and it's actually really important. The time that we're living in right now, we're at an inflection point for a number of reasons at this point in the 21st century. We've got the emergence of the forced scientific paradigm. We've got the emergence of AI. We are kind of moving in between geopolitical epochs with we don't like to refer to it as great power competition because we're not really competing with China, but we're certainly in a period of increasing great power enmity. And so it's important actually from just from a peace and stability and prosperity standpoint that we're able to reinforce the international rules-based order. And it's exciting to me that particularly here in Southern California, there are a lot of those non-traditional vendors. In some cases, there are folks in a garage. You actually probably have a couple here in Tehachapi, some really smart engineers and home builders that have a good idea. And so we are actually creating an ecosystem. To directly answer your question is, yes, there's the traditional way. So the B-21, right, is undergoing active test at Edwards Air Force Base. That's, we have our normal business processes for how does a B-21 come in and get tested. And while we're testing the B-21, we're also, the newest airplane the Air Force has. We're also testing the B-52, the oldest one. But we now have an open portal for people with good ideas. So we just did the ribbon cutting on Pi Day on March 14th this past year of a new experimental test force. The Air Force wants to innovate rapidly. It's been, I think the world has had its eyes opened with kind of the pace of development that we've seen in Ukraine, and how quickly they've been able to take a couple different pieces of technology and integrate them together for some really, really novel effects. And Operation Spiderweb just a week and a half ago, as we're recording this, was probably one of those. It'll go down as one of those historic raids. This was the drone attack deep into Russia. So there are people with good ideas, and that's exactly why we are leaning more into the experimental and prototyping, because if we can connect, we have test pilots with warfighting backgrounds or just backgrounds in operational, and so they understand the warfighter needs. We've got engineers, very, very talented engineers that can actually figure out this didn't quite work and why didn't it quite work, and here's from an engineering standpoint, how do we fix it? And we've got an instrumented range. So the test ecosystem at Edwards is there, ready for the ideas, and we are open for business.
Yeah, and so, kind of a unique podcast, Maya, because typically we'll have a business owner in here and they want to tell us everything about their business, right? And obviously, General, you can't tell us everything as much as we would like to know. But, the U.S. military, not only do they protect the United States of America, but they have a hand in protecting the entire globe.
Yes.
Right? And there are some countries out there that would like us to trip and to fall so they can come in and, not so nice people and do what they want to do, ravage different countries and so on and so forth. So the respect level from me, from Tehachapi, I guarantee you is 110% in what you do and the support. So just thank you for what you do and anything we can do to help continue to support those activities. And I'm an aviation geek anyway, so I just love what you do. you, and it's just fun stuff.
I appreciate that, and you're very welcome, and thank you, because a lot of our Edwards families live here in Tehachapi. It is a time of consequence, so I'll be blunt about it. Chairman Xi, the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, is actively pushing back against the international rules-based order that has kept the relative peace and prosperity since the end of World War II.
Right, and if you don't believe that, you're living under a rock.
Right.
Mm-hmm. What's the next? You talked a little bit about like AI and that sort of thing, and technologies emerging. We see so many things being tested, whether it's on the ground, driverless taxis. What's the future of the airmen, in your opinion? Seeing all these technologies, what is that kind of future role for the airmen? Are they going to be in control of the aircraft in the future? Are they not? Do you have any ideas about that?
It is always about the people. Fundamentally, it's people that do things. The technology is great. I'm a geek as well. I love the technology, but the people are what make it. We are actually actively testing right now. We are evaluating AI agents. One of the platforms we have over at Edwards is the X62 Vista. It's a heavily modified F-16, and for the last 2 years, we've had a number of different vendors that have developed AI agents, trained AI agents in a virtual environment. And there's this gap between what happens in the computer and what looks good in the computer and what actually works on an airplane. Yeah. And so we have a platform that has an outer loop for safety, and there's a safety pilot in it, but we can actually put an AI agent in there and have it fly basic dogfighting maneuvers. Mm-hmm. And we've demonstrated that with a number of different vendors. The future, so what we've actually learned from that will be able to be implemented directly with CCA. So how do you test? How do you evaluate? What are the techniques and the procedures for evaluating an AI agent? And so that's something that we had to invent. The fact that we did that ahead of time means that when CCA flies later this summer, and those are going to be autonomous flights initially. So there's not going to be somebody, at a remote keyboard flying. They're going to push a button, say start, go, and the autonomous aircraft is going to do it autonomously. So we got the YFQ-42 Alpha and the YFQ-44 Alpha. Both are going to have their first flights this calendar year and then come to Edwards. The future, CCA is very, very bit a part of that, is a human machine teaming. And so, I don't ever see it just being all AI or just all autonomous, and there's probably ethical reasons that we never want to turn war completely over to robots. But what we really see is that the AI and the autonomy can make the human better, and there's things that ChatGPT doesn't get everything right all the time. In fact, it makes things up. Yeah. But humans can recognize that. So the pairing together of AI and autonomy with the human really makes them both better. And so that's the immediate future.
When Corey writes staff reports, they're always ChatGPT. And so I'm like, dude,
Microsoft
this is not,
Copilot.
You got to remember to take away the prompt that you wrote. Would you like me to tell you more?
No, I'm just kidding. So when we talk about the mission, so I'm going to read the mission of the base. We test and evaluate advanced aerospace systems with world-class installation and mission support to accelerate war-winning capabilities to the warfighter. And that's not just for the United States of America, but that's to our partners.
Yes, it is.
Throughout the world, Australia, Great Britain, those sorts of
there all
countries.
The time, right?
They are there all the time. And I will take our partners over Chairman Xi's partners anytime. That's one of our competitive advantages, right? Yes. We've got the Aussies, we got the Brits. Mm-hmm. Chairman Xi, he has North Korea, Putin, Iran. I'll take ours over his.
Yeah, North Korea's launch of that new destroyer went really well the other day. So, things get skipped.
I'm chuckling here with a little bit of schadenfreude.
Mm-hmm. But that's Navy. We're here to talk about
I'm just saying, it's a point of their military technology. I mean, it might look good before you actually try to perform.
Yeah. And then your vision, the center of the aerospace testing universe.
Yes.
Testing tomorrow's war-winning capabilities today.
Yes.
And that's quite the statement. And that's what you do, and you do well. I mean, your team members, whether they're military or civilian, and the support structure, I mean, you guys are world-class.
It is. We were just telling the story. So we had yesterday, we had a group of local community come through, and we were telling the history of Edwards. We started, so 1933 is originally when the Army Air Corps, brought a presence. We had a bombing range out there at the dry lake bed the lake that had no water. The old Quorum stop on the railroad. Before they came further downhill through Tehachapi.
So. Yeah.
But really, 1942. So during we were new into World War II. The jet engine had just been invented independently by there was a German Oheim and there was a Brit Whittle. Sir Frank Whittle. The jet engine was invented. We didn't want the world to know that we were working on a jet fighter. And so in 1942, they wanted a location that was remote and isolated so they could do things in secret. And it turns out that those early jet engines they didn't have a whole lot of thrust, so you needed a lot of runway to take off. And they were also unreliable. They quit. They had a tendency to quit. So you actually needed a place to land. The lake bed, the Rogers Dry Lake bed, was perfect for that. And so ever since then, since 1942, since we got our start there on that very first jet engine, every generation of fighters since then, so first gen, second gen, third gen, fourth gen, fifth gen fighters, all developed at Edwards. And the F-47 is going to show up here in the next couple of years. That'll be a sixth gen fighter. CCA is a sixth gen capability that will fly first with fifth gen. First time the space shuttle came back from space.
I was there.
Outstanding. 1982.
Prince Charles.
Yes.
Was in attendance, and
Greg. Prince Charles and Greg.
And I was. It was a school field trip. Oh. And we went out there, and we weren't beside the prince or anything. We were like 10 miles away. But I remember clearly, and that was a moment we were talking earlier before we started the podcast about moments in time where it burns into your brain. I was 7th grade and went out there and watched the space shuttle, peel off and do its thing.
Yeah, you would have heard the sonic boom as it came back in.
It was amazing, yeah.
I had a chance to see it twice. One officially as a NASA guest as a kid, because everybody up here knows somebody who works at NASA, and back then they're just, oh yeah, I'll get your passes. And we stood at the fence for hours, and it was impressive to watch this thing come in. No power.
You'll miss it if you're not watching quick.
You get one chance.
And then make a U-turn and come down and land. And the second time we were coming back from my grandma's house in Vegas, we heard the sonic boom. We're like, what are these people on the side of the freeway? Oh, their shuttle's coming in. We pulled over and watched it land too. So it's an impressive facility and those types of feats. And remember as a kid seeing the original stealth, bomber flying around as it was testing at Edwards. And that was, you read about it and then to actually see it in the sky, it looked like Batman. Yeah. It was so cool as a kid to see those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that center of the aerospace testing universe, I hope that's not taken as hubris. Because it's actually more than just it's just the fact that where we are here in the AV, the Antelope Valley or the Aerospace Valley, depending on, there's just so many things that have happened here through history. The fact that NASA Dryden, now NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center is there on Edwards. Of course, the Mojave Air and Spaceport and all, winning the Ansari X Prize in 2004 with that great, Burt Rutan and the great scale team. It's just there's so much that's happened here. So that center of the aerospace testing universe, kind of vision is really just a statement of, the partnership between everybody that comes here to the, what used to be the Wild West, but which is really just the frontier of aviation and continues to this day.
Right, and your partnership with the Navy. China Lake.
Yes, China Lake.
You share airspace, and you guys do so much testing between the two of you. It's remarkable.
And that's growing. So the systems that we're testing now actually span much greater geographic areas. So one of the enhancements that we're doing right now with the Navy, I'm glad you brought up that partnership. We are connecting all the ranges. So off of Point Magoo, we have all the sea ranges, and we're actually wiring those ranges together with our R2508 complex.
I think our Congressman Fong is hoping to work on that.
He was,
it's so important with the hypersonic and all the different
hypersonic
things.
Corridors and yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff.
And a point of pride for us, I would say, as an entire community of Tehachapi, and me personally especially as well, when you see those things, as you pointed out, whether it's a machine from Edwards Air Force Base or it's something from that you see private space flight, and every time you see these things and you hear about it on the news or there's a test, you just really know that somebody that's living in Tehachapi had a place in that.
Yes.
Right? They were either working on the engine or they dealt with some of the testing or they dealt with the composites or they were flight testing at Edwards. Like it's amazing that a community our size is having such an impact on the global mission, whether it's defense or it's private space flight or all those that are intertwined. It's really a very cool point of pride to understand that your neighbors are working on this stuff that's the future of the military.
And it may extend in areas that you don't immediately appreciate. So for military families that we have living on base, they'll actually often come over to Tehachapi on the weekend because this is a great place to kind of go and get away from the heat of the Mojave Desert a little bit. Go to this mountain town that the Pacific Crest Trail comes through, and go to the farmers market on a Thursday. It's this is kind of some great restaurants, some great musical venues, and so this is kind of the place where a lot of Edwards families come and play.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just great to know that the folks in Tehachapi have a role in all of this stuff happening, across. When you look up in the sky, that your neighbor probably worked on some aspect of that project.
Yeah.
Now, I go back to this a lot, quite frankly, but it means a lot to me. Part of your strategic plan is one of your priorities, your first priority is quality of life.
Yes.
And developing your people and the role that you play, but also the role that we play. And we share that common interest in, it's just not the guy that's flying the jet, right? It's everyone behind him.
Yes.
That's doing what they do, up to and including the friends and families and children. And, I have friends with one of your enlisted men that works on the F-22s, and he has three kids, and then his wife got pregnant with twins.
Right.
And we went out there, and we had a little baby shower, and then the Thunderbirds were doing their thing, and I was more interested in the Thunderbirds practicing than, the twins on their way, But it's all about relationships and people and investing in people, because it's not about the computers or the desks or the jets necessarily. It's about the people that are actually putting their heart and soul into that, and those are the ones that are going to protect our freedoms.
Yes, yes. And that quality of life, that number one priority, that really came from a realization. I was, so 2023, I took the guide on. We did a program management review maybe a month later, 2 months later. And at that point in time, they said, sir, we need to hire 2,000 more people by 2028 just to support the test programs that we've already signed up for. And I remember thinking, how are we going to hire 2,000 people here to this remote and isolated place in the Mojave Desert? And so we're like, well, let's start knocking down the impediments. And so quality of life was a priority because I thought, it turns out that people are just excited to come work for us. So we actually, in the first year, we hired 1,000.
Wow.
We still have some hiring to go. I do expect there's currently, just with the change of administration, there's currently a federal hiring freeze. We do have permission and a method for obtaining exemptions to that, and we've received several of those. Just again because of the nature of our work and the importance of our work, it's very easy for us to make a compelling case that we need these people to work on these programs. But I do expect in the future that we're going to be back on that hiring glide path and adding a lot more folks. My only regret with that quality of life priority is actually referring to it as quality of life, because it seems like that's kind of a nice to have, not a need to have. It's actually really a mission readiness. Mm-hmm. So, because medical care in the families, and there's actually a great, you've got some, a lot of our medical partnerships that are actually, here in Tehachapi.
Mm-hmm. Adventist Health,
yes.
Valley. Mm-hmm.
So Adventist is actually exploring ways that we might be able to open an urgent care, either right outside of Edwards or actually on Edwards. We're actually exploring opportunities with Adventist. So it really does come down to, it's not quality of life, it's really mission readiness.
Yeah. I think I've heard your predecessors speak about this too when it comes to, when you have a mission-focused airmen that are actually not worried about their families that are maybe they're not living in the best neighborhoods because they couldn't find housing. Right. They couldn't be housed on base, so they had to go somewhere else, and they might be in a bigger city. And if that airman's distracted thousands of miles away across the world worried about their family,
as we're doing high-risk tests.
Exactly. Then it's better for them to have that peace of mind that their family's in a place like Tehachapi where they feel relatively safe and they could focus on the mission at hand.
Yep. And schools go right along that. Education is a high priority for a lot of our families. And, so we have a very robust relationship with our local school district. And of course, a lot of our Edwards families are in Tehachapi schools. I'm really excited about the STEM outreach opportunities that we do, from Edwards out to local communities. And what a great opportunity, for a 7th grade class to go see the space shuttle land. And, so we're open. We have school groups come by all the time. I take every opportunity I can when a school groups comes to come out and give them boomerangs and fly boomerangs with them. And we've actually got a DoD Starbase. So fifth graders from the Tehachapi schools come over and spend a week, an immersive week-long experience, hands-on science experience doing up at DoD Starbase Edwards. And occasionally they'll let me out of the office and over there to talk to the fifth graders. I love doing that and share and do some math lessons and talking about flying airplanes and how I use math as a test pilot.
See, and that's how you can get 2,000 employees, because it's kind of dirty pool. Like, you get these kids hooked early, and then a few years later when they're in the job market, they're like, yeah, I loved when I went over there. And
dirty pool. I guess maybe I shouldn't be broadcasting that, right? Because I don't want the Navy up at China Lake to hear our secrets and steal away some of our prospects.
It could be. I was just playing with my, in my house once, just playing with my kids. They had some stomp rockets, and we're out, on the street playing with them. And the neighbor just came out and he said, I saw you guys playing with rockets, and this is what I do for a living. And he, wanted to hang out and talk about stuff with the kids and how it all works. And it was really cool, to our point earlier, like, these are your neighbors.
Yeah. And so I guess if I can kind of put one public service announcement out there, doing that type of thing is extremely important. Mm-hmm. And so I would just encourage anybody who happens to still be listening to find an opportunity to kind of connect with those youngsters and encourage them. We are at China produces 8 to 10 times the number of STEM graduates every single year compared to the U.S. And I was before I was at Edwards, with the great opportunity to be the 412th Test Wing Commander. I was a permanent professor of aeronautics at the Air Force Academy, and I tried to sit down with every new engineering major and ask them, why'd you pick this path? This path is not easy. Mm-hmm. I commend you, but why? And they could often point to an experience. Somebody, they were doing stomp rockets with their dad or with their neighbor. Or they were, RC aircraft, or they've got a ride in an airplane, or they had a teacher. Oftentimes it was a teacher, either in high school or in middle school, that said, you're really good at math. You should consider doing engineering or doing STEM. And that's so important. So to the extent that we encourage the next generation.
Yeah. Well, talking about encouraging, I know the Air Force has a museum. It's not officially the Air Force, but there's a group, a nonprofit, the Air Force.
Yeah, it's the Flight Test Historical Foundation.
There you go. Thank you very much. And there's a museum inside the gate, but I know that there's a fundraising effort to relocate the museum on the outside of the South Gate.
Right outside the West Gate.
West Gate,
yes,
sorry.
Yes.
And just outside of Roseman, which the city of Tehachapi has donated.
Yes.
And I would encourage people to donate, to get involved, and to make an appointment and go and actually see the museum and see some of the historical artifacts from years past, and really encourage the youth to start thinking about, I might want to do this, or I might want to do that, right? So it's a great little museum.
It's like a Hall of Fame.
It is.
I mean, you walk in, you're like, wait, this guy was here? I know that name.
Yep.
That guy was here? It's crazy.
We just found, we were back in, we have a lot of artifacts. We don't have the space to display them. Eventually we will in the new, and the skeleton of the building is there right at the West Gate. We were just going through some boxes, and they pulled out this old pressure suit from the X-15 days, and it's got the faded NASA meatball on it, and they look at the name inside the pressure suit, and it's in Armstrong.
And I saw that. It's actually on display.
Yes.
Yeah, it's on display. And I'm like, whoa.
The lady pulled it out of the box and showed it to us. She's like, you can touch it if you want.
Yeah.
That's like the Grail.
Corey was afraid to touch it. I touched it, but he was afraid.
This is holy ground here. I don't know.
Yeah. Before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, he was walking on our flight line.
Yes. Yeah, that's the crazy part. You realize this when you see all that stuff, how much, and even and Greg, you might remember what aircraft was on display inside the current museum, but how big it was, you're like standing under the wing as it's inside this museum, and it's amazing the size of these things.
I had the opportunity once for an award ceremony, went to Wright-Patterson. They have a beautiful museum there.
Yes, they do.
And we had a dinner underneath the wing of, I don't remember what it was. It was a big bomber. It was years ago. But that was a moment in time also.
Yes.
Like, are you kidding me? Am I here having dinner underneath, a B-52 or whatever it was, and that was one of those moments where you're like, okay, I am into this.
I have to know, General Wickert. Sorry to. I'm just dying.
Oh,
to know.
Maya's here.
Oh, okay.
I told Maya before we started, Greg's going to carry this one. I'm just going to interject.
I had to get my few questions out at the beginning, but
We do have a host.
but we're talking about these moments in time and exposing kids, especially to the wonderful world of aerospace. What was your moment in time?
Great question.
Great
That's why
question.
she's-
That's
We only hire the best.
yes. So this actually has a local connection. So 1986, there was something. So first time that an airplane flied unrefueled around the world. It was Dick Rutan, Gina Yeager, aircraft designed by Dick's little brother Bert, and Greg, you actually have a connection with Bert,
Oh,
don't you?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead, though. This is your story.
So it was a really dramatic. In this, so when Voyager took off in December 1986, it was the first time that they had totally fueled the aircraft. The wings were full of fuel. The wingtips were actually dragging on the runway. They had to get to, I believe it was 86 knots. I actually used the video of that takeoff whenever I taught the takeoff performance lesson to aeronautical engineers. And it's dramatic, 2.5 minutes. I mean, imagine getting in your car and taking 2.5 minutes to accelerate to 80 miles an hour. It's extremely slow, and you didn't think it was going to make it. And then when it did make it, they were airborne, but they still had to climb over the ridgeline. You saw the Tehachapi ridgeline in the background. That was before there were lots of windmills out there, but they still had to climb enough to get over the mountains. And that was just the start of 9.5 days of incredible excitement. There was a typhoon in the Pacific, Typhoon Marge, I believe, that they had to go around. And the original plan was to go right over the northern part of Africa. And this was right after the El Dorado Canyon raid of 1986. So Muammar Gaddafi had bombed a nightclub in Germany. In retaliation for that, we had a raid from England all the way around the Iberian Peninsula to attack Libya. So the Libyans, Muammar Gaddafi was absolutely convinced that this was a spy plane, and he said, "I'm going to shoot it down." So they had to divert further south and ended up in the tropics during in a lot of thunderstorms. In the middle of the night, they're in a thunderstorm and then found themselves, in 90 degrees of bank at 10,000 feet. And of course, the fuel wasn't working right, and the fuel pump quit working, and all kinds of things. And at the very end of it, right, 9 days later, they're coming up Baja, California, and the engine quits. And they had to get the other engine restarted. It looked like they were going to have to ditch, just mere couple hundred miles away from the destination. That finally landed back at Edwards Air Force Base, because the rule was you had to, took off from Edwards, it landed at Edwards. So this is December 1986. In 1986, there's no internet. The ARPANET existed, but nobody knew about it. A couple universities were connected to it. Cable TV was a thing, but you didn't really have it. So there were 3 broadcast channels, and they all covered it on the nightly news. And so there was a 13-year-old boy who was home from school on Christmas break who watched every single update on the news for 9.5 days, read every single article they could. And that experience on that 13-year-old boy might have been influential in kind of the life choices that they ended up making and what they studied in school and what they did. And I actually had the opportunity to work with Bert Rutan and Scale Composites many, many years later in my Air Force career. And so to come back full circle. So that was my kind of a seminal event growing up, where at 13, I knew what I wanted to do.
I remember that news footage you're talking about, and I wasn't quite 13 at the time, but I remember that. I remember Channel 17's coverage of them making the landing. And that's, to this day, I still remember that, how big of a deal that was.
Yeah. Interesting. So I tell that story to cadets all the time when I was teaching at the academy. And so Dick Yeager Dick Rutan and Gina Yeager, they were partners before they started, and they weren't really talking to each other after 9.5 days. So the life advice that I would offer cadets is, if you think you found your life partner, maybe get into a phone booth and spend 9.5 days. And if you're still talking 9.5 days later, it was meant to be.
And we weren't talking about a big comfy cockpit either.
No, it was not. It was loud.
Yes. That was a very interesting aircraft.
You guys should have, it's really cool to hear this story, but you should have been there.
Yes.
Yeah, right. There was
right?
Greg.
You were,
Prince,
weren't you?
and then Greg.
Yeah.
Was Prince there too? Or?
Quite, no, there was no Prince. A bunch of people that wanted to be king and queen. So that moment then translates into a general commanding the Air Force.
It does.
412th. I mean, that's being a general and the 412th commander, to me, is That is so amazing. I mean, the competition seems to me like Edwards would be a very competitive place to be, right? To command, because you are the tip of the spear when it comes to testing and making sure that those technologies are the highest quality, and we're protecting the pilots and that whole business model. Not to take away from anything else, any other military operation does around the world, but to do what you do, man alive, that is so impressive to me.
Yeah, I would actually use a different C word. I'd say collaborative. We have an incredibly collaborative team, and it's we have a lot of geeks. A lot of engineers, a lot of test pilots that are geeks as well, and it's an engineering challenge, an engineering puzzle, and so there's not a whole lot of competitiveness because everybody's just looking at this like, oh, how do we solve this problem?
Well, I know at one of our local breweries, and Key Budge would know this, him and his wife and I, it's Geeks Who Drink.
Oh,
so at LCB
that sounds like my kind of
microbrewery. So, maybe they're figuring out what's going on at Edwards while they're, trivia and drinking a couple beers at a local brewery. Who knows?
I'm very tempted.
Solve the problems. Yeah. Every Wednesday night, LCB
outstanding.
We'd mentioned this earlier before we started the show, but and you talked about really where you're at is in terms of hiring in the future and military spending. But you kind of brought up the point that like the goal when it comes to military spending is not to necessarily, yes, you want to have the tools to win if you get to that point. But really your mission is you want to be a well-prepared military, but not necessarily have to use it.
Oh, precisely. So Eisenhower said that the only way to win the next war is not to fight it. And so, a war between the two biggest economies in the world would be devastating.
Everybody loses.
Oh,
everybody.
It's
loses.
Potentially a civilization ending.
Yeah.
So we really, it's very easy for our team to be motivated every single day that they come to work. The B-21 is specifically designed to have the range, to have the level of stealth that's necessary to operate in that anti-access area denial space, that strategy that China has taken for the Indo-Pacific. China is trying to rewrite the rules. They're building islands where they didn't exist. They are about every 2 months, they are doing something that's even more provocative than it was 2 months before. So last December, they held a naval operation that had more ships in it than any naval exercise since the end of World War II. It was close to 100 ships, and they didn't announce that they were doing it. It for all intents and purposes, it appeared that maybe the invasion had started. So that was in December. In February, they sailed 3 warships down in the Tasman Sea between New Zealand and Australia and started shooting live fire missiles. They did tell the Australian government that they were doing it once they started firing the missiles, and they had to divert commercial air traffic around the live fire exercise. Once they finished firing those missiles, those ships circumnavigated Australia on their way back to China. Has now got the biggest navy. So that was February. April, they had coordinated activities between the Chinese Coast Guard and the PLA Navy, People's Liberation Army Navy, and it was all intents and purposes a blockade exercise or a quarantine exercise. A blockade has a definition under international law. Blockade is an act of war. So the scenarios that we're kind of concerned about now is that maybe China actually quarantines Taiwan instead of. So regardless, there's just a lot of provocative activities, and so we see our job at Edwards and the fact that we're working on the B-21 as we are trying to change Chairman Xi's calculus about starting World War III. If he thought it was easy, if he thought he could just invade Taiwan with impunity and that there would be no reaction, it probably would have already happened. So the fact that it hasn't happened, we don't want war. And war is not inevitable, but you have to be prepared.
And even just that sort of statement and conversation, I think previously in previous wars, it was, let me find the biggest explosion, biggest ordnance, but now it's more on the precision and stealth.
It is. More
than anything else. Before it was just me build the biggest and baddest and have the biggest impact, but this is like I'm going to build something you never see coming.
Yes, you're exactly right. And that's the strategy. And again, it was to bring kind of the legacy of Edwards again. It's what we now call the second offset. It's the approach that we took with the Cold War. So there was no way that we were going to be able to compete with the Soviets in terms of numbers. If you looked at the status of forces in Europe, the Warsaw Pact outnumbered us 2-1, 3-1, 5-1, depending on which weapon system that you look at. How many tanks, how many helicopters, etc. So we decided we're not going to compete with the Soviets. And so we went stealth. We went precision weapons, precision navigation. That's when GPS satellites were put up, was in the 1980s. And that's what won the Cold War. And it was on great display in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, or I should say on just, it really surprised the world how we were able to drop GBU-27s right down elevator shafts with very, very precise, trying to minimize collateral damage. And China, in particularly, went to school on Desert Shield, Desert Storm and studied what the U.S. was capable of. And over the next 20 years, until 2010, Chairman Xi came to power in 2012, 2013. They started to develop a force, and that was only accelerated when Chairman Xi became the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. He was only supposed to serve for 2 terms, 2 5-year terms. He rewrote the Constitution, so he can now serve for life. So Chairman Xi is an authoritative.
You've heard that one before, right?
Kind of like Putin,
this
right?
Is kind of this is the playbook, right?
It is.
Well, what you do out at Edwards is so vitally important. But question for you: what's your favorite plane to fly? Most favorite plane to fly, and why?
Yep. The next one. Yeah,
but currently in the inventory.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
I do love flying. Every time you slip the surly bonds of Earth, and you have a lot of pilots, a lot of home builders here in Tehachapi. Just that view that you get. I do have to say, I'm an F-16 baby. That's what I, first cut my teeth in. Flew that for a long time. It's a little sports car. I'm flying F-35s now, which it's a supercomputer that has wings. It's actually amazing when I kind of reflect back on a single career. When I started flying the F-16, I was a Block 40 Lantern guy, and a number of your military folks that really follow the military will know what that means. But when I started flying the F-16, we had a radar and a radio, and we tried to figure everything out with just like talking over the radio and what we saw on a radar that wasn't really all that good of a radar. And we didn't have NVGs yet. My very first combat sortie, I was number 8 in FLIR trail. So we had a FLIR pod that looked forward-looking infrared, and it gave me a picture in the HUD. And so I'm number 8, which means that there's 7 F-16s in front of me, and we're lights out. We're over southern Iraq. And we're lights out, but there are 7 little dots that are the engine cans, the engine burners that show up in my FLIR in front of me. And I've got to try to figure out which one's my flight lead. I'm like, who am I supposed to follow? I'm number 8 in FLIR trail. No clue what I'm doing. Yeah. So to go from no SA to what the F-35 is now, and over the course of my flying the F-16, we got a couple data links and some modems, and then eventually we got Link 16, and we got NVGs, and we got JDAMs, and we kept incrementally adding this capability. So much of what it was actually all developed here at Edwards. And now the F-35 can see the information. It is a supercomputer. It fuses information from space and from data links and from sensors and from EW and from electro-optical systems, and it puts it all into this single piece of glass in front of you. And we've actually rewritten our operational plans. And in the very near future, we're going to have combat collaborative aircraft, which will even further reduce the cognitive load of the pilot, because instead of having to do individual things, he'll be able to assign a mission task to a combat collaborative aircraft. So this loyal wingman, or several loyal wingmen, flying with her, she'll be able to say, okay, I'm an F-35 pilot, you go do this, and CCA number 3 will peel off out of formation and go take care of that mission, and she won't even have to think about it again. Wow. And that's in the course of one career. Yeah. So just the pace of technology, I'm really, really proud of our Air Force and what our country. Yeah. The innovative spirit that's still in the country. China is impressive in terms of capacity, but they just copy what we do.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing too. I mean, it's obviously being an airman and you're flying combat missions and that sort of thing, but the test pilot has always kind of, in my mind, that's the person who people say, we've done some tests on this. They slide it over and say, this should work. And then you go in and see if it works or not. Yep. And it's amazing to me that people sign up for that. Yeah, sure, I'll give it. I'll go ahead and kick the tires on this one. I mean, that's nuts.
No guts, no air medal.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it's not just the pilot, right? So and it's the engineers, it's the analysts that look at the data and not only figure out, well, it didn't work, but why didn't it work and what does it take to fix it? Yeah. And the maintainer that actually, in many cases, a pilot without a maintainer is just a pedestrian. That actually, hey, we got this this new box is supposed to connect to this and it's supposed to work, and it's actually the maintainer that figures it out.
I think one of your colleagues at Edwards at a meeting I was at was he was in charge of the maintenance division, and he said, what was his line? If it's in the air, maintenance put it there. Right, there you go.
Yep.
See?
Yep.
Yeah.
and there's all the other support functions that go along with it. Actually, one of our critical enabling capabilities is actually our Child Development Center. We've recently had to reduce hours because we don't have enough CDC workers up at Edwards Air Force Base. We used to offer 12 hours of childcare, and we have some missions that span that. They start really early or go really late, and that's going to impact test missions. And so it really does take a team. It takes a village to do everything, and we've got some great folks working on the team.
Yeah. Well, and it's that old, the old JFK story, right? Goes, visits NASA, talks to the janitor, and he said, how do you like working here? He said, are you kidding me? I put a man on the moon.
Yes.
It's that mentality that makes it all work.
Yes.
Guys, I'm sitting back listening, as I typically do in these conversations. I love being a fly on the wall and hearing just the amazing technologies and information that is coming out of Edwards Air Force Base. It is so impressive. Is there anything else, General Wickert, that you want us to touch on that we haven't asked you about so far?
We are going to be hiring. Right now we're not, but if you're interested, reach out to us because it's going to happen, and we're going to need people. We are at a historically high ops tempo, and it's also it's an incredibly exciting time to be part of all this. So we want people to come join our team, and there's also other ways to. You actually don't have to work at Edwards to be part of the team. So again, the Tehachapi is just beautiful little corner in nestled in the Sierra Nevada, and so it's just it's a great place to come over and escape to. So we're all in this together. The fact that this complex human society works at all is always amazes me to think back. So if you're a teacher or if regardless of what you do, you've got a part in it, and so I guess that's my thought is I just want to thank everybody for, and particularly right now as we're kind of seeing widening polarization and divides and everything, is like, hey, let's just come together as a community and actually have meaningful conversations with each other.
Couldn't agree more. Maya, I have two questions. Would you like to share with us your call sign?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to do so. Yeah, so my call sign's Beaker.
Beaker.
Beaker. Some of your older listeners will recognize the Muppet
Babies.
The Muppets.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
I can see it now.
Yeah. So you grow to resemble your call sign. I didn't look like this before. My very first fighter squadron. So, I'm a graduate of the Air Force Academy. I went to MIT for grad school immediately after graduating, before I went to pilot training. I show up my first fighter squadron, and they put you in the weapon shop. That's where you put all the new lieutenants. So I am the hapless lieutenant in the weapon shop. The chief of weapons was several years older, was also an academy graduate, had also gone to MIT for their graduate work before going through pilot training. His call sign was Bunsen. He had over-rotated on landing on an F-16 and had drug his burner can on the runway.
That sounds expensive.
There's a couple of the turkey feathers needed replaced. So he got the call sign Bunsen for Bunsen burner for dragging his burner can down the runway. And Dr. Bunsen on the Muppets, Beaker, was the hapless lab assistant to Dr. Bunsen.
Right.
And so in the weapon shop of the 4th Fighter Squadron Fujians up at Hill Air Force Base in the 388 Fighter Wing, Dr. Bunsen was the chief of weapons, and the hapless lieutenant lab assistant to Dr. Bunsen had to be Beaker. Yeah. So Beaker it was.
So you want a good call sign, that's for sure.
That's good.
And then, Maya, we have the Build a Plane program in Tehachapi with some amazing volunteers. And so
wow,
you would probably recommend to parents to, seek this out and maybe get their children involved with the Build a Plane program. Would you not?
I would. That's one of the things, I observed, and actually a lot of engineering programs across the country, we recognize that the way to inspire a young engineering student is not to say, okay, well, there's the science building, there's the math building, go take physics, go take calculus, and come back to us in 2 years. The way to get them excited is to get them hands-on doing something engineering as a very first experience. So that's something that we started at the Academy with 3D printing. And I can't think of a better way for, before going to university, for a student to get excited about opportunities
all aspects of aviation.
Yeah, exactly. From the maintenance in the building to actually being an engineer, being a pilot. It's just it's something constructive and productive to do that's not on a screen.
Yeah, so many great volunteers, and my wife and I actually rent the hangar for the program.
Fantastic.
We've been doing that for a couple of years, but the people that are volunteering their time, much greater contribution, and they retired NASA, retired Air Force, so on and so forth. So these people really know what they're doing, and it's a very exciting.
What
program.
a great program!
It's been several years in the making. So they're on their third kit airplane, and they build them, and then they fly them, and then they sell it and buy another airplane, and it just works out really well.
That's phenomenal. Hey, can you imagine the excitement of actually having your hand, helping to build a wing box, helping to construct a put the stringers in, and then to go see something fly that you helped build.
That moment in time.
That
right?
moment, it could be that seminal experience.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Well, in building those moment in times as well, we have going along with the Build a Plane program coming up on August 2nd is our Young Eagles Flight Rally. So this is an exciting event that we're bringing back where kids ages 8 to 17 can go on a free flight with some local pilots around the Tehachapi area and learn all about what goes into.
This is a beautiful place to fly.
Yeah.
Tell us the date again on that, Maya.
Saturday, August 2nd, and people need to register ahead of time online. I believe it's eaachapters.org. You'll find the Tehachapi Flight Rally, and it'll be a really cool event. Again, it's free, a great way to expose kids to
EAA
aerospace.
stands for Experimental Aircraft Association, and a lot of your employees are actually part of this organization, and on their own time, they're building and flying their own home builds, if you will.
Yeah. I can't think of a better experience for a young person to slip the surly bonds of Earth.
There you go.
And speaking of flying, I know you guys have your airspace and you have your flight patterns, but every once in a while you can fly over here. Just we get once in a while, but just
let's expand that.
You can say hi. You can bring it over because it's really
one of the
cool
great when I do newcomers orientation,
as low as you want. I give you the authority right now. Just do it. Just go for it.
Yeah, the FAA may have a thing or two to say about that, but it's one of the things we warn our new families that show up at Edwards Air Force Base when newcomers is we have a supersonic corridor that goes right over, and you'll hear it. You hear the ba-boom, ba-boom.
You know what that ba-boom is? That's the sound of freedom.
It is.
That is the sound.
I love that.
Actually, I'm asking him, do you know what that is?
Well, no, I better use that because usually I start to get into a really geeky discussion about, so you have the bow shock, which is an overpressure, compression of all the sound.
Well, that's an
intensity.
MIT coming out in you.
And then on the trailing edge is so you can actually tell the length of the airplane based on the time interval between the ba and the boom. Longer airplane will have a lot wider time interval, and you can actually work out how fast the airplane is flying as well from the sound intensity. And we don't hear them, so you have to have just the right atmospherics. But the Falcon 9s, so those actually have a ba boom. There's actually a triple shock because the shockwave interaction with the grid fins as it's coming back.
That's right.
Years ago when I worked at CSUB, we hosted Air Force in a baseball series, and so what they ended up doing is the coach actually, they had a connection and it was the first year of that program for CSUB baseball, and they said we want to get a flyover, and they got one from Edwards, but they didn't tell anybody on campus. I knew about it. It was fantastic because this thing came in nice and visible, let's just put it that way. Building shook, and the professors, what's going on? And then the baseball coach was like, oh, we forgot to tell you we were doing this. And but the Air Force cleared it because they're here and they're the ones who set it up for us. So it was great. It was great.
Well, I have to say NASA, they've flown over their F-18 a couple, or not F-18.
Yeah.
And they're pretty low and fast.
They are.
There's a challenge.
Yes.
So we're talking about the sound of freedom here with our sonic booms, but the whole theme of this episode is the salute to freedom, right? Circling back here. This is kind of like an essay prompt question for you, but what does that mean to you as general with our Edwards Air Force Base here and serving our community, our nation, our world? What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great question.
It is a great question.
I'm sitting here thinking, I'm not sure I could answer that. No. I'd have to think about it for a while because it means so much.
It does.
It's so deep.
This really is a time of consequence that we're living in right now. We have a beautiful planet, and there's plenty of challenges facing us. The challenge that we shouldn't face is international war. And so I think we should always be striving for a peaceful world because prosperity comes on the back of peace. So, and where does freedom come from? It comes from being willing to stand up to those bullies and those dictators who would rather take more for themselves and subjugate, the people that they should really be helping and uplifting. And so, the fact that for most all intents and purposes, the United States has generally been very good about upholding that international rules-based order that does ensure peace and prosperity. And it hasn't always been that way, right? We've had at times, fight for that freedom, fight for that prosperity, and we have stood up. And the fact that there are people today that are still willing to do that for the good of the rest of humanity, I find deeply encouraging. It's actually a path I am. Both my wife and I are from Air Force families. I had grandfathers that flew in World War II. I had a great uncle that was a B-24 pilot. My dad's a retired colonel. My father-in-law, retired colonel. My oldest daughter, just commissioned as a second lieutenant a year ago. My son is doing Air Force ROTC right now. So I wish I had a nice, succinct way. It's a beautiful question. And I guess I just step back and I see the international order and I see the human species as this complex socials. But we need rules. And if we're going to have rules, you have to have somebody that is willing to enforce the rules. And unfortunately, that often means that we have to have a military that's ready to enforce the rules by force. But we never want to do that.
And that's where we come in. You mentioned, you say your statement, uplifting each other and not fight each other.
Yes.
And that's where we come in, right? We want to uplift.
Yes.
Yeah, beautifully done.
Ended on that.
Yeah, that's it. Boom. Mic drop.
Cut him.
Anything else, guys, in closing? We covered a lot of ground today, but it was super insightful, and I think it'll really provide our listeners a whole new perspective on how Edwards Air Force Base plays such a pivotal, integral role in our community here in Tehachapi.
Well, and I just really appreciate the partnership. All of our local communities, Tehachapi is a wonderful partner, and really appreciate the time and the invitation to come over here for the afternoon and spend some great time. Barry and I were just talking as we were driving into town here, and the flags are all along the street, and the murals are there, and there's a little slice, a little corner, a little remembrance of Americana. Mm-hmm. It's easy to imagine kind of, 100 years ago. The cars look a little bit different, but it still has that same feel. Not that I was around 100 years ago. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
Well, wonderful. General Wickert, we greatly appreciate your time today. And of course, your service as well. This episode is all about thanking the men and women who have provided so much for our nation's safety. So thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, Corey, thanks as well for joining us today.
Thank you. Ditto. Well done.
All right. For anybody listening, if you have comments or questions about anything discussed today, you can email us, media@TehachapicityHall.com. And thanks again for tuning in. We hope to catch you back here next time on Tehachapod.
You've been listening to Tehachapod. If you have a question, a thought, or a suggestion, email media@TehachapicityHall.com. We'll catch you again soon, right here on Tehachapod.